All right, let's have some fun. We're going to have some fun, but we're going to inform the people. We are having fun and we're informing the people. We're going to have some fun and we're informing the people. We are having fun, but we're informing the people. Was that a silly thing I just did? Do I look foolish? Okay, so a lot of people don't want to talk about politics because there's just so many moving parts. There's so many variables that it's hard to keep track of all of them. There's federal versus state versus local legislation. There's executive versus federal versus legislative. There's Democrats and Republicans. There's economics to keep track of. There's foreign policy. There's so many moving pieces that it's hard to keep track of everything. And so a lot of people instead will just choose to disengage and kind of shelter off in the corner, pursue their own narrow interests around whatever hobbies or activities they enjoy doing, maybe watch some Netflix, still have a general dissatisfaction with the political system in terms of, thinking that people are generally corrupt and both parties aren't really working on behalf of their constituencies, and that money has a disproportionate impact on legislation that's passed, but not really understanding the details of it, and also not really wanting to engage with it regardless. Instead, just kind of grumbling to themselves while sitting on their hands. And if I'm the powers that be, I'm not the powers that be, but if I was the powers that be, you see, I'd be 1, 2, 3. Stop being foolish. Try to inform the people. We're having fun, but we're informing the people. If I was the powers that be, I have no problem with people sitting on their hands and grumbling to themselves, because that doesn't really affect my going around and continuing to act in the best interests of the people that I actually represent, which I'll get to in a moment. On the other hand, if people are grumbling to one another and using their hands to actually engage with policy through writing letters to the editor or writing their congressman or shaking hands with other people once COVID is gone, or doing other things, sock puppetry, using their hands for art, creating butterflies, shadow butterflies. This is what people should be doing with their hands. But it's not, and so there's an apathy that's inspired instead. And even though it is true that there is a lot of things to keep track of and that politics are complicated, fundamentally it's pretty simple. And so I'm going to put this graph on the screen using my new technological wizardry, which is a graph of congressional election winners with one variable. And so if you understand this one variable, you understand a lot about the government. And that variable is campaign contributions. Which candidate of the two major party candidates got the most money? And 90% of the time, roughly, for both House and Senate campaigns, the candidate that gets the most donations ends up getting elected. And so even though there's other variables which are important, like Democrat versus Republican, like young versus old, or female versus male candidates, or white versus black, these are all important, but the main thing is the money. Now, it's true that correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, and a lot of times, or sometimes, the donor class and the wealthy will choose to just give money to the candidates that they think are most likely to win regardless, and in doing so get on their good side ahead of time. But that's 90% correlation is pretty strong, and it has a lot of effects down the line in terms of who we're represented by, and then what those representatives ended up doing and who they end up being accountable to. And so the two most common professions for politicians are not teachers and yoga instructors, or daycare center workers and nurses, or lumberjacks and coal miners, or every other profession in the world except for these two, which are lawyers and businessmen, which are two professions which you've probably thought of by now, or realized are very tied to big money and finance, and are likely to have a lot of money. And so if you're a person thinking to run for Congress, and you don't have too much money, and you're just, you run a shelter for dogs, you do something that doesn't get you very much money, and you're running against somebody that might be a scumbag, but he has $500,000 to flood the airwaves with 30-second commercials that make people feel warm and fuzzy and say nothing about policy, but talk about freedom and America, and have lovely pictures of people skipping through flower fields with their pets. then that person's probably going to win. And so they'll win 90% of the time, as we can see from that graph. And that has the effect of those people getting elected being tied to a certain class of people who are interested in furthering their own wealth and not necessarily in the interests of the public at large. And so even if you just understand that, that money dominates politics, then you can understand most things.